Ya sé si nos entremezclamos, porque si no, no salimos en la foto. Pase usted más acá, más al centro usted y yo también, aquí en medio de ellas dos. Así. Que salgas completa. Estoma. 1, 2, 3. Alabao, alabim, bomba, estoma, ra.
Ay, perdón, sí, ahí va. Y ya la que dijimos también en el concurso de anatomía a nuestra sociedad, igual, la vía, lavao, la bim, bomba, Sociedad Mexicana de Anatomía, ra. ¿Estamos? ¿Listo? 1, 2, 3. Alabío,
Alabao, alabim, bomba, Sociedad Mexicana de Anatomía, ra.
Muchas gracias. Muchas gracias a todos los equipos. Muchas felicidades, mis tigres. Que le vaya muy bien.
Muchas felicidades. Doctor, gracias. Felicidades. Muchas felicidades. Doctora, felicidades. Doctor, muchas felicidades. Bueno, y a continuación tenemos la conferencia magistral del doctor Drake. En un momento, en media hora, es la cita.
Sí.
A las 11 entonces.
Ya el doctor Grey anda con nosotros aquí en el auditorio, gracias por acompañarnos. Y entonces en 25 minutos iniciamos para que hagan el ejercicio pertinente. Y gracias a todos.
Jóvenes, tomen asiento. Viene la conferencia internacional del Dr. Dre y continuamos, ¿no? Ok. No se vayan un momentito, ya está pendiente ya la conferencia y continuamos con el concurso. ya un ratito viene la ponencia internacional y continuamos también con el concurso. Gracias.
Bienvenidos. Al público que se encuentra, les pido de favor que puedan ir tomando su lugar. Si pueden acercarse, estaría muy bien que estuviéramos ocupando estas dos salas, principalmente donde están las sillas, para que se vayan acercando. Si me apoya parte del staff, para que podamos ir colocando a los estudiantes, de igual forma también a maestros y docentes, parte administrativa de la facultad, para esta magna ponencia. ¿Podemos ir cerrando las puertas? Muy bien. Para dar continuidad con el programa de esta 26ª reunión de morfología por parte de la Sociedad de Morfología, tenemos el honor de presentar en estas instalaciones al doctor Richard L. Drake, quien va a dar una conferencia de nombre de Anatomy Educator, Broadening Horizons. Daré una pequeña semblanza del doctor. Richard L. Drake tiene un fellow de la Sociedad Americana de Anatomía. Él es profesor emérito en el Cleveland Clinic Lerner College of Medicine. Es reconocido como docente, investigador, educativo, autor y líder en su campo. Es un maestro consumado, galardonado por estudiantes, instituciones y por la American Association of Anatomists, donde recibió en el 2011 el prestigioso reconocimiento Henry Ray Elsevier Distinguished Educator Awards. Como investigador destacado, ofrece conferencias sobre temas educativos en congresos nacionales e internacionales y ha publicado numerosos artículos revisados por pares y capítulos de libros. En el 2009, el Dr. Drake fue nombrado miembro de la misma Asociación Americana de Anatomía y recibió la medalla Dr. José Eleuterio González, otorgada por la Universidad Autónoma de Nuevo León, en Monterrey, México, donde es profesor afiliado a la Facultad de Medicina y ha realizado contribuciones sobresalientes a la educación médica. Es uno de los autores de reconocidas obras como el Grade de Anatomía para estudiantes, el Grade de Anatomía Básica, el Grade Atlas de Anatomía, el Grade Anatomía de Superficie y Ecografía y el Grade Flashcards de Anatomía. Entre sus actividades previas de liderazgo se incluyen secretario, tesorero de la Sociedad Americana de Anatomía durante 11 años, coeditor en jefe de la Anatomical Science Education de la revista educativa de la misma asociación durante 10 años, tesorero de la Federación Internacional de las Asociaciones de Anatomistas durante 10 años y presidente de la Asociación de Anatomía, Biología Celular y Neurobiología. Bienvenido, Dr. Richard Edelrey. Welcome.
Well, thank you very much for the introduction, and I'm very excited to be here. I want to thank Elsevier for inviting me here, and for Alberto to be taking care of me and showing me around and having me talk to people. We had a nice dinner last night with various members of the Mexican Anatomy Association. It was okay, except I'm not sure about the grasshoppers. So they were introducing me to new food. Today what I want to do is talk to you about not only teaching anatomy, but also learning anatomy. So I'm going to sort of cover different ways and how it can be presented, how as a student you can learn it, and just continue to move forward in that direction. All right?
Ok, de igual forma va a estar con nosotros el licenciado Isaías, quien va a estar, Isaac, perdón, quien va a estar traduciendo en tiempo real.
Okay, so basically, when you're talking about learning anatomy, you basically are covering not only how to learn it, but also how to teach it. And so I'm going to go through some various things about what we're doing now. I want to thank Elsevier for the job that they're doing in continuing to move our book forward. And, you know, it's kind of a surprise. You never necessarily think you're going to publish a book or write a book that's actually going to be really successful. And there's a lot of people that are shocked that my name's on a book like that. Because not everyone is the greatest student in the world. And a lot of us have to work very hard to be at that level. And that's sort of what medicine is all about, too, is spending time, putting in the time, and understanding what you're going to be doing in the future. So, some guiding principles related to learning anatomy. Generally speaking, you want an active versus a passive learning. So you want to be doing things like laboratory things or electronic things or something that you're doing rather than just being kind of very passive in your learning situation. Make use of a variety of educational experiences, a multimodality approach. Again, make use of everything you can get your hands on that have to do with learning or teaching of anatomy. Focus on learning in context, a closer integration with clinical medicine. Anatomy used to be taught almost separate from medicine. And what has been better is that we've brought the two things together. Because just doing anatomy and then expecting your medical students to know what the heck that's going to relate to in the clinics doesn't really work well. So the best way to teach anatomy is to combine the anatomy with what it's going to look like in a clinical situation.
Okay.
Learning should be longitudinal. Do you want to talk?
No, go ahead, sorry.
Okay. I have to learn to get used to this combination talking. Learning should be longitudinal. Basically, you don't take a course the first year and then forget about it. You need to add to the learning every year, every week, and just continuing to process the whole thing. Because when you get into the clinics, they're going to expect that you know the anatomy. And so, again, the longitudinal learning is very important.
Okay. Pues el doctor dijo que, gracias, que básicamente en el aprendizaje de la anatomía los estudiantes deben de aprender de forma activa, por ejemplo, no solo a través de libros de texto, pero sino practicándolo, ya sea en el laboratorio, en sus prácticas, Y también, por ejemplo, deben usar el uso de diferentes tipos de materiales educativos, como pueden ver en pantalla. Después deben enfocar su aprendizaje a base de, de una integración más cercana, más, íntegra. Y el aprendizaje debe ser longitudinal y debe ser continuo.
Okay, you may proceed. So you want me to pause after each slide, right?
Okay.
All right, we're getting this together, so. All right, so moving on. Turn the classroom into an interactive learning environment. Again, you're just not sitting in the classroom. Your instructor should be developing things that keep you moving and thinking and moving forward with the learning. Develop expectations. Students are part of the educational process. I'm just not up here throwing out a lecture. What I'm doing is trying to move you forward in your career. And that's the job of the instructor. Okay, so that's why it's really a joint process in learning. Students should prepare before coming to class. Now, obviously, that seems logical, but honestly, I've seen lots of students that don't do that. So, if you can't do all the readings, at least kind of do a subscript through the readings. You may have modules. Some schools have developed modules that you can look at. So there's ways you can learn by looking through these modules. But again, be prepared to come to class, because that's really the important thing, and that's what your instructor should be doing, is helping you get ready to be prepared to come to class. Turn lectures into interactive seminars. And these are different ways you can teach. There's team-based learning, and where you kind of divide up into groups, and then you talk amongst yourselves, then you come back together as a group. Also, audience response system. So use a response system. So if you're in front of a group, you may ask a question, and then you want someone in the audience to answer the question. So again, the whole idea is make learning of anatomy or any subject interactive. It's not something that you just sit there, read a book, although there's great books out there. So that's a personal plug. You don't just read a book to learn anatomy. You need to do things to continue the learning process. And even the clinical people will tell you that they're still learning when they're up in the clinics. So it doesn't end if you're going into medicine as a career.
El doctor dijo que básicamente que debemos de generar expectaciones acerca de los alumnos. Para empezar, los alumnos siempre son una parte íntegra del aprendizaje, y que básicamente el profesor no solo está presentando la información para que ustedes se lo tomen y se lleven a casa y adiós. No, ustedes deben de absorber esa información y procesarla y sacar lo más útil de esta información. Después, los estudiantes siempre tienen que venir preparados, porque dice que ha tenido experiencias en el pasado donde ve que los alumnos no vienen preparados a la clase, no han leído en casa o no han hecho sus investigaciones que deben de hacer. Y esto es un rol muy importante que debe hacer el estudiante: hacer su tarea, hacer sus investigaciones, leer para la clase, estar preparados, ya que pues el profesor solo imparte la información, pero realmente la persona que está aprendiendo son ustedes, y van a tener que pues absorber, o tienen que buscar una forma de mantener esta información en sus cabecitas hasta que desde que el día que la aprenden hasta el día que se gradúen y que empiecen a ejercer. Otra cosa es de que los profesores deben de hacer sus lecciones más interactivas, ya que pues esto hace como, a través de, por ejemplo, a clases en equipo, ya que porque una cabecita no piensa igual que dos o más. Y eso es siempre hacer que los estudiantes participen, hacer preguntas para que ellos digan su propia opinión, que aprendieron, cómo lo interpretaron, hacer que sea más interactivo, más interesante para ellos. Y obvio, y no solo leer libros, que también debes de tomar esos aprendizajes y ponerlos en práctica. Y esta práctica siempre la vas a aplicar desde en la escuela, cuando te metiste a medicina, hasta el día que estés ejerciendo tu especialidad o lo que sea.
Okay, make use of a variety of educational experiences. As I mentioned, a multimodality approach. And these are just some of the things that you might want to use, or you could be using, Cadavers. Now, I realize, and I've been told, that it's a challenge to get cadavers in Mexico. And the faculty, I know, is trying everything they can to get something related to the cadaver you can learn from. So that is an important part of your learning, and hopefully that can move forward in a positive direction. In the United States, we're lucky that we really don't have such a problem getting cadavers. So it makes this part of the learning a lot more easy from the standpoint of you've got a source. Obviously, bone specimens you can get, those you can purchase, and your department, I'm sure, has those materials. Fixed specimens, again, whether it's an embalmed cadaver or other type of specimens that are loose, that still is part of the learning process. Imaging, radiology, very important part of the learning. Basically, try and blend radiology with the learning of the anatomy, so that when you look at an x-ray, you're aware of what you're looking at, and you mentally can put it back to think about what that cadaver or what that patient looked like. Traditional models are obviously very useful. 3D models are something they're coming up and using more of and have been over the last few years. I'm going to talk about the latest stuff towards the end of the presentation, and that's the new visualization techniques. So we'll get to that as we finish towards the end of the presentation.
El profesor apenas abordó el tema acerca de un acercamiento multimodal para el aprendizaje de la anatomía, porque como saben el doctor viene de Estados Unidos, entonces pues en Estados Unidos tienen una gran cantidad de cadáveres que pueden tomar para el estudio. Aquí en México pues no tanto, entonces pues es un proceso más complicado, pero pues sí se puede lograr aquí también. Y pues ese es el punto número 1 que mencionó, los cadáveres. Es una de las herramientas más claves en el estudio de la anatomía, ya que pues te da un punto de vista estás básicamente ahí literalmente con el cadáver y puedes analizarlo de una forma más minuciosa. Otra forma es con los huesos. Los huesos como son parte del cuerpo y aparte pues son relativamente fáciles para conseguir en este país. El departamento lo puede conseguir de una forma más fácil que a diferencia de un cadáver. Después tenemos especímenes específicos de parte del cuerpo, ya sea órganos, ya sea un músculo en específico, nervios, lo que sea, etc. Después tenemos imaginología, lo cual es otro punto muy importante en el estudio de la anatomía, ya que pues estás viendo las diferentes partes del cuerpo y lo puedes estudiar de forma más específica. Después tenemos métodos tradicionales, por ejemplo, disección, análisis, que pues ayudan como métodos tradicionales para el aprendizaje de la anatomía. Después tenemos las impresiones 3D, que pues es una forma de observar un músculo o un tejido o parte del cuerpo de una forma pues en primera persona, pero sin tener el órgano o el hueso o lo que sea ahí en tu presencia. Después tendríamos los nuevos métodos de visualización, como por ejemplo
algunas aplicaciones informáticas y demás. Bueno, el doctor también mencionó algunas aplicaciones informáticas y demás técnicas de aprendizaje que pueden aunar pues a todo pues el conocimiento construido a partir de los modelos tradicionales o los impresos en 3D.
Okay, moving forward. Focus on learning in context. So again, you're trying to combine all these things and learn the material as you go along. Move towards a closer integration with clinical medicine. It's really not good if you're in the first year of anatomy and all they're doing is talking about anatomy, but they're not relating it to what it's involved with in the future. So in an anatomy course, you should really always be going back and forth between the learning of the basics and the future use of it. Use a clinical case to provide a basis for learning. So that's one way you can do that very easily, contextual learning. So here's an example of that. This is the title of this one was Current Jelly Stool and Weakness. This is a 59-year-old man arrives at the emergency department with massive bleeding from the rectum. His blood pressure is low, his pulse is high, and his blood count is 2/3 normal. What do you think is the problem? So right away, you should, in your mind, be thinking that, okay, there's a blood volume issue here, and something has disturbed the normal situation. But that's the kind of clinical problem that you want to put out there. and have the students think about where it's taking
Y
you
que
in the
nosotros somos los
future.
que traducimos para los que van a-
Go ahead, Dan.
So I think we're going to let you continue the full, like,
the full session, and we'll do the questions and the Q&A.
Okay, so we're going to change the technique here a little bit. Again, this is just an example for how a course might be put together. And it's really an example for people to think about, because you can only do what your administration allows you to do, right, faculty members? And so if you'd like to teach more, you may not have that option. So the idea is to figure out how to fit it in. And my course was one that we had to fit it into a very limited amount of time. And so this assignment, the sort of the way we did that. The first year, we had class on Monday for 25 weeks from 8 to 10 o'clock. Now, the other thing I must tell you, that my last appointment at the medical college that I was at the Cleveland Clinic, we only had 32 students. So, in my case, I thought I'd died and gone to heaven, because I was used to doing 180. Here, you're used to doing way more hundreds. But we only had 32 students, but we still divided everything up so that there was more of a one-on-one type of learning. Second year, again, in theory, the second year should be more clinically oriented learning, so that you're taking what you did in the first year and you're now putting it into action and thinking more the clinical terms. So we had to revisit anatomy during an integrated course. Basically, it was 2 hours about every 4 weeks. So we didn't meet every day. Okay, so again, this is you're doing other things, so you've got to fit everything together. Third year, at least at my institution, this was a review anatomy before clinical rotations in surgery. So every time the students would get ready to do a rotation, that part of the class, then we would have an anatomy review. Just to, again, bring it all back to memory and get them ready for the clinical people to add the clinical components. Because you're really not learning anatomy just to pass an exam. You're learning anatomy to use it in the future. In the fourth or fifth year, as I said, the program at the Cleveland Clinic was a unique program. It was a 5-year program because the students were asked to do a year of research so that they got experience in science and doing research. So fourth or fifth year, surgical clinical anatomy elective. So we would do special things and provide it an option for the students to have. Our approach, and this is the Cleveland Clinic Lerner College of Medicine of Case Western Reserve University. In the United States now, you have to be tied to a university. You can't be a freestanding medical school. So the names of all the medical schools have all gotten longer because they got to tie it to a university. And basically what we wanted to look at is how is it affecting the approach we use, student learning and retention of anatomical knowledge. And in this case, what we did, and the program up there is very unique and much shorter than your program. And so we had to look and see, is it working? And this is the mechanism that we used to see if it was working, to make sure that we were doing what we were supposed to be doing, and we were getting the students ready for what was going to happen and what they were going to be involved in each succeeding year. So in this case, we had problem-based learning facilitators, and this was asking them questions. Are we doing this the right way? We asked the PBL facilitators, the longitudinal preceptors in the clinics. These are individuals that would have several weeks with the same group of students and move them through clinical activities. Results from the national board exam. And in the United States, as I'm sure here too, you got to pay attention to the national board exam. So we would kind of look and see if we were working out and fitting into that need. Residents and fellows who work with the students. We asked the residents and fellows, were the students doing any good? Were they learning things? Did they have the material they needed to move into the clinics? Because that's the thing that you're training for, is for the future. Surgeons aren't lining up at my door. That means if the students really don't know anything when they get to a surgery thing, the surgeons at the Cleveland Clinic, they came down and yelled at me and told me I'm not doing my job right. So the idea, that's why that's up there, is that we did ask the surgeons, do the students seem to be knowledgeable when you're working with them on a patient? at least a third of each graduating class has gone into surgical or radiology residencies. And that's just typical of the Cleveland Clinic. It's kind of a surgery-based hospital, so the majority of our students would end up going in those directions. And so we needed to prepare them for that. Experimental design. So we had to design an experiment, develop an assessment tool, evaluate anatomy knowledge at different periods during medical school, starting with the first year, and then at the end of the first, the second, the third, the fourth years. And so again, this was just a way to see if the students were learning anything and if we were doing what we were supposed to be doing. The assessment tool, we use multiple choice questions. USMLE, that's the test that they take in the third year of medical school, the national test. And I had written questions for that. So these would be multiple choice questions. Short answer imaging questions. Again, 6 imaging questions. Question distribution, and this would just be how we would spread it out throughout the body. So we didn't want to give them a test that just did one region. This is supposed to be a review, and we're going to see where the students are in their learning. So that's how we kind of spread that out. Now, new teaching options. Okay, so obviously things change. And even me, an old person, needs to make sure that they're changing with the times. And believe me, that can be difficult at times. And so these are just some examples of new things that were going on. Radiology up the top, a sector table down here, then new imaging type techniques and over there, and then getting into kind of the future. And I'm going to show you the future and what's going on with that in just a few slides. So tables, a visualization table. This is interactive 3D from CTs and MRIs, virtual dissections, and it's called the anatomage or the sector table. And it's basically just a big radiology table. And that's what this structure looks like. And you can bring up all kinds of views, different types of things. You can move through things, and these are the students, they're working it. You know, I would be standing there. This was one of our stations as the students rotated around the lab, either doing cadavers or this or radiology or something. And we would be there and sort of quizzing them or asking them what's going on or leading them through the use of this. So this is a sector table. And this is some of the views that you would get with a sector table. So you could show front lawn views, you could show cross sections. Again, making the students aware of what they're going to see in the future, because this is mostly first year. Ultrasound simulation, obviously that's something that you don't introduce the students just to radiology, but you want to also show them some ultrasound, and so they can start to understand what ultrasound's all about. Ultrasound is pretty challenging to view things. It's not something that comes real easy, so it takes some work. Virtual or mixed augmented reality. Now, this is kind of getting into the new stuff, and you'll see, and I've got more things on that. And basically what we're talking about is, here's a laboratory. It's the lab at my institution. Basically, our lab looked like an operating room, because that's basically what it was. And we designed a program around it. You can see they're all wearing goggles. The instructor's talking to them about what they're seeing in the goggles. And these are VR goggles, not the new modern stuff. I'll get to that in a little bit, okay? Unembalmed cadavers. Okay, now, I know in Mexico you have trouble getting cadavers, but they are embalmed cadavers. When the Cleveland Clinic was starting the program and interviewing, well, me, and they said, we want you to use unembalmed cadavers. And I fell on the ground. And when I got up, I said, you want me to do what? And they said, unembalmed cadavers. And I said, yeah, but there's blood. And they said, use unembalmed cadavers, because they wanted the students to experience and see what it really looked like in the operating room. So I had to design a program that worked with fresh cadavers. And that was kind of interesting, because we'd get them out of the 4 degrees temperature we kept them at, use them for about an hour and a half, and get them right back into the refrigerator. We could get them to last, actually, 3 to 4 weeks, a single cadaver, even longer, if we were good at bringing them in and out. But this is the learning, it's very unique. I don't know of any other program anywhere in the country in the first year introduces students to unembalmed cadavers. And I had to learn a whole lot too because they bleed. You know, embalmed cadavers don't bleed a whole lot. These guys, they would bleed, and so you had to figure out how to do a dissection without having blood all over the place so the students could see the anatomy. So this was a big learning experience for me. And it's interesting, no one has ever been able to explain what I'm going to tell you, but the thing that was interesting in the dissections of the cadavers, there was virtually no blood in the arterial system. All the blood was in the venous system. And I never could figure out how one beat of the heart would push everything out of the arterial system. But actually, we would find very little blood in the arterial system. But you had to watch out for the veins. So that's, and we're unique. I don't know of any other medical school in the country that uses only unembalmed cadavers in the United States. Everybody uses embalmed cadavers, which is what you are using in Mexico. And this is just showing the students what the lab would look like. Again, we put them in scrubs. We had them in gowns. We had them in masks if they needed it. It depended on what the event was and what we were looking at. But it basically was like a surgical situation every time we had class. Now, I will tell you one interesting thing that COVID, when it hit, that became a problem because the students' classes were all canceled and they had to do them individually in separate rooms. We were able to still do the cadaver lab because we were in masks and eyewear and gowns and gloves. So the medicals, I went up and pleaded with them. I said, look, they're safe. They're not going to spread COVID, so let me do it. And so all during COVID, we were the only class that actually met as a class. Everybody else was doing individual learning. Now, split time just means you're doing different things in an order in the amount of time you have during the day. And this is kind of how we arranged the whole year. So the cardiovascular and respiratory sciences systems, that was the first section of an incoming student's preparation. And weeks 1, 3, and 5 were at the HEC. Now, the HEC is the Health Education Campus. That's the non-cadaver lab. I'm going to show you a picture in a minute. And the weeks 2, 4, 6, the L building, that was the cadaver lab. So that's all that means there. But I'll show you some pictures here. And what we did, and this is an example that you may be able to use for the teaching of anatomy here. And you kind of just recreate new things. And what we did was we had 5 stations that you can see over there. And it was a dry lab. And as I said, this is in the non-lab building. And these would be the various stations that would be involved. And I can't get the pointer part to work, so that's okay. It doesn't show up. And one was radiology, ultrasound, virtual reality, and then the other 2 over here. And we had the students rotating around tables. And so they would see these 5 stations and rotate around a table. And again, that might be something to help break up the learning in your courses, the instructors that are here. And then in week 2, they would go to the cadaver lab. And now they would work on the cadavers. And we would have stations again, radiology, cadaver station, cadaver station, cadaver station, cadaver station. And now we had them in scrubs. Now they were learning and seeing on the cadaver what they'd been doing the week before in a classroom and in a class lab type setup. And the different pro sections that we used are listed here: a chest wall removed, anterior chest wall removed, and heart and lungs removed, and then heart specimens. Okay, now what I want to do is take you to kind of the new things that are occurring. And these were things that actually, I was retired, so I had to go back and learn things. So I had to go into the lab a couple weeks ago and start playing with all the new toys. And it's evolving anatomy education at the clinic. And these are the present and future innovations. And this is the contact person. And I'll show his information again at the end. So all you faculty members that are out there, if you want to know more about this new level of education, contact him. Don't contact me. Okay, I'm the old guy in this process. Why won't you change? There. Okay, and so this is an example of some of the things that are going on now. We have hybrid radiology stations, dissection opportunities, new VR. So this is the real big new thing, is the virtual reality goggles. And I don't know if they're using some of those here or not. Are they using any of them here? But that's kind of the wave of the future that's going on. And then dry lab work. So again, this is the goggles. I'm going to show you a little bit more about these. I put one of these on for the first time 4 days ago. And it was very interesting to look at. I'm going to show you some pictures in just a few minutes. But these are goggles that you have. It's not cheap, but they found the person at the school that I'm going to give you his name and information about, he's found a way to get some that are less expensive than the regular stuff. And this is kind of the new thing with anatomy. And again, the upgraded VR headsets. And again, as I said, the upgraded, that's an important term because this is the new stuff. And you can just see 100% found the headsets more comfortable, easier, and more intuitive to use. 94% wireless design incorporated improved focus. So you can just see these things are doing a good job of helping students learn anatomy, especially this one. 94% reported better understanding of complex anatomy. And obviously that's what we're sort of after. So this is kind of the wave of the future. They still use cadavers, but this is where they're also moving to as the next step.